Containment breach in Sector 7. The shout crackled through the prison's intercom as emergency lights bathed the corridor in pulsing red. Dr. Elias Vex slammed his back against the cold metal wall, fingers trembling around the jagged device in his palm, a prototype never meant for human testing. The guards' boots pounded closer, their distorted voices barking orders through gas masks. Reality itself rippled around him, the air shimmering like heat off asphalt. One wrong calculation, and his molecules would scatter across dimensions. The device hummed, its fractured display counting down. 3 seconds, 2. A gunshot ricocheted off the ceiling as the world tore open around him, swallowing the shouts, the light, the very laws of physics. For a heartbeat, there was only the deafening silence between dimensions, and then the falling began. Cold metal pressed against his cheek as consciousness clawed its way back. Dr. Vex's eyelids fluttered open to a nightmare of his own design. A glass coffin, adrift in perfect darkness, suspended where up and down had no meaning. His restraints hummed with a familiar vibration, the same harmonic resonance from his unpublished papers on quantum entanglement. A dry laugh crackled through hidden speakers. "Welcome to your masterpiece, Doctor." The warden's voice dripped with mocking triumph. "Your equations power these walls. Poetic, isn't it? The architect caged by his own blueprints." Vex's fingers twitched as the restraints flickered, just for an instant, their molecular structure briefly unraveling like a glitch in reality. He'd seen this anomaly before in lab simulations. The prison wasn't just using his research, it was bleeding it, straining at the seams of physics. Every flicker in those restraints whispered the same terrifying truth: this cage wasn't a trap. It was a countdown. The lab's sterile glow burned Vex's eyes as armored guards shoved him toward the shuddering core, a swirling orb of fractured light, its surface crawling with hairline cracks. "Stabilize it, or you'll wish we'd left you in your cell," the warden's voice hissed through the intercom. Vex's hands hovered over the controls, his reflection warping in the core's unstable surface. He recognized the flicker patterns, the same cascading quantum decay he'd theorized years ago. Stabilizing it would buy the prison another century of operation. But tweaking the harmonics just slightly, nudging the entanglement fields into dissonance that would do something far more interesting. His fingers danced across the interface, inputting flawless corrections, until the final keystroke. A deliberate miscalculation, hidden beneath layers of legitimate code. The core pulsed once, twice, then let out a scream of rending spacetime. Alarms howled as the guards lunged, but the shockwave hit first, peeling the room apart atom by atom. Vex's vision shattered into a kaleidoscope of overlapping realities, 100 versions of the prison flickering in and out of existence, then silence. The floor solidified beneath him, but the air tasted wrong, metallic, charged. The surveillance drones overhead weren't scanning for escapees. They were ignoring him entirely, their protocols reversed, targeting only uniformed personnel. A grin sliced across Vex's face. The core's backlash had thrown him sideways into a mirror image prison where every security measure was inverted. Somewhere in the bleeding edge between dimensions, the quantum clocks were counting down. 47 minutes until the realities snapped back into alignment. 47 minutes to turn the prison's own defenses against itself. A guard rounded the corner, visor raised. Vex braced, but the man walked right past him, muttering about containment breaches in Sector 3. The rules had changed, and for the first time since they'd locked him in that glass coffin, the numbers were on his side. The flickering holoscreen cast jagged shadows across the control room as Vex's fingers flew over the cracked terminal. Project Exodus. The words pulsed like a wound across every file, each document stamped with clearance levels far above anything he'd seen before. Schematics unfolded before him, revealing row upon row of glass coffins just like his own, each wired into a monstrous latticework of quantum conduits. His breath caught. They weren't just imprisoning physicists, they were harvesting them, siphoning off the prisoners' subconscious calculations to stabilize the prison's unraveling dimensions. A gasp echoed behind him. A lone guard stood frozen in the doorway, weapon half drawn. "He's not supposed to be here." The man's shout triggered a klaxon that sent cracks spiderwebbing across the walls. No, not cracks. Fractures in reality itself. The air between Vex and the guard warped like disturbed water, revealing fleeting glimpses of other corridors, other versions of the prison where the walls had already collapsed into howling voids. The guard's radio erupted with panicked voices reporting containment failures in multiple sectors. Vex lunged for the terminal again, pulling up a live feed of the central reactor. His stomach dropped. The core's containment field was fluctuating wildly, its surface boiling with unstable quantum signatures. The warden hadn't just stolen his research. He'd weaponized it, turning human minds into circuit breakers for a machine tearing holes through spacetime. Every prisoner wired into that system was moments away from having their consciousness shredded across dimensions. The floor lurched violently, sending tools clattering off tables as gravity stuttered. The guard screamed as the left half of his body briefly twisted, his uniform and flesh unraveling into fractal patterns before snapping back into place. Vex's ears popped from the pressure change as the terminal before him dissolved into static, then reformed, showing a different screen entirely, security footage from the main execution chamber. His blood turned to ice, strapped to the central platform, surrounded by humming restraint fields, was another version of himself. The warden's voice boomed through the disintegrating facility. 34 minutes, Doctor. That's how long until every version of you in every dimension gets erased, unless you walk yourself back to your cell right now. The feed cut out as the ceiling above Vex began peeling upward like burning paper, revealing not steel girders, but an infinite void where the stars themselves were blinking out one by one. Somewhere in the collapsing timelines, a countdown was ticking, and the prison wasn't the only thing running out of time. The air smelled of burnt ozone as reality stitched itself back together around Dr. Vex. Same prison, same corridors, but now thick with the acrid tang of overloaded quantum stabilizers. His reflection glitched across a shattered viewport, revealing the silhouette behind him before he turned. Dr. Marquez stood framed in emergency lighting, her lab coat pristine despite the chaos, fingers hovering over a holopad that projected the prison's fracturing structural integrity in pulsing red. "You always did have a flair for dramatic exits." Her voice was calm, surgical, the way she'd once dissected flawed equations during their morning research briefings. But the holopad trembled in her grip. "I wondered when you'd stop running through mirrors and face the original." Vex's fists clenched at the screens behind her security feeds, showing the Mars colony disaster replaying on loop, his name stamped across every forensic report. "You designed this place," he hissed. "You knew they were using my work to pin the collapse on me." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Mara's face as she tapped the holopad. The footage zoomed in, isolating a quantum signature swirling amid the wreckage, a perfect match for Vex's prototypes, except for one jagged anomaly in the waveform. "Replication isn't perfection, Elias. Someone copied your research but missed the harmonic dampener you always baked into the code." She stepped closer, the prison's tremors sending ripples through the hologram between them. "The signatures don't lie. You were framed. The wall monitors suddenly erupted with live feeds from the reactor core, dozens of glass coffins now glowing crimson as the system siphoned their occupants' neural activity. Mara's composure cracked. They told me this was a rehabilitation project, that we were stabilizing volunteers. Her knuckles whitened around the holopad. By the time I realized what they were really harvesting, you were already in containment. A thunderous crack split the ceiling as the prison's gravitational stabilizers failed. Vex grabbed Mara's wrist as debris rained down, his voice cutting through the chaos. Then help me burn it down. The holopad's projection shifted, revealing a skeletal blueprint, an emergency exhaust port leading straight to the core. Mara's breath hitched. It was the same backdoor she'd insisted on installing during construction, the one she'd joked would save them if their equations ever went rogue. Somewhere below, the quantum clocks kept counting, 31 minutes. The prison shuddered again, but this time, Vex felt it, the faintest resonant frequency humming through the walls. The same harmonic signature from his stolen research, the same flaw in every replication. Mara's fingers flew over the holopad, her eyes locked on his. You realize if we do this, there's no cover-up left to expose, just rubble. Vex's smile was all teeth. Then let's give them an accident they can't fake. The transfer corridor shuddered as another batch of prisoners shuffled through the magnetic restraints, their hollow-eyed stares fixed on nothing. Vex counted the seconds under his breath, his back pressed against the vibrating wall panel. Right on schedule, the gravity generators beneath them let out a tortured whine, the sound of his carefully planted harmonic interference finally taking hold. The first pulse sent guards crashing to their knees as artificial gravity inverted for a single, stomach-dropping second. Ceiling became floor as coffee mugs, stun batons, and 3 very confused security drones tumbled upward in a chaotic ballet. Vex timed his lunge perfectly, snatching the quantum keycard from the technician's belt as the man clutched at a suddenly weightless console. The technician's eyes bulged when he noticed the theft. That's impossible. His voice cracked over the screaming alarms. Those are coded to individual DNA. Vex smirked as the card's surface shimmered under his grip, its quantum matrix briefly flashing violet, the telltale sign of his years-old biomimicry research being put to good use. He'd encoded his own cellular resonance into the prison's systems during those early, voluntary lab tests, back when the warden still thought he was cooperating. The second gravity pulse hit harder. A guard's armored boot slammed into the ceiling beside Vex's head as the corridor became a pinball machine of flailing bodies. Through the pandemonium, Mara's voice crackled in his earpiece. You've got 90 seconds before they reroute primary systems. The holomap she'd smuggled into his retinal display pulsed with a new path, a maintenance shaft hidden behind the now deactivated laser grid. Vex ducked under a tumbling detainee crate, tasting blood where his teeth had cut into his cheek from the last gravity reversal. The keycard burned in his palm like a live wire. Across the corridor, a containment field flickered around a particularly vicious-looking inmate whose restraints had failed. The man grinned at Vex through broken teeth, flexing newly freed fingers. The prison's automated riot protocols would assume this was random chaos, but Vex knew better. Every misfiring gravity plate, every overloaded stun field, all carefully orchestrated dominoes falling toward one objective. The technician was still gaping at him when the third pulse hit. This time, gravity didn't just invert, it twisted. The man's horrified scream Dopplered away as he pinwheeled down the suddenly 90-degree corridor like a discarded toy. Vex didn't wait to see where he landed. The keycard slotted into the hidden maintenance panel with a satisfying click. its stolen DNA signature overriding protocols that had never accounted for a prisoner smart enough to hack his own genetic code. Somewhere deep in the prison's bowels, the quantum clocks kept counting. 28 minutes, the riot was just getting started. The maintenance shaft swallowed Vex whole the moment the hatch sealed behind him, its walls breathing in the sickly green glow of bioluminescent emergency strips. His boots left no prints on the metallic grating, not a good sign. Quantum foam crackled at the edges of his vision as he stepped forward, only to freeze when the corridor ahead curved in ways architecture shouldn't allow, bending back on itself like a snake swallowing its own tail. The keycard in his hand vibrated with increasing urgency, its display flashing a single word, recursion. A wet cough echoed from a side passage that hadn't existed 3 seconds ago. Vex's pulse spiked as he turned to see a figure slumped against the wall, ragged jumpsuit, familiar scar above the eyebrow, hands glitching in and out of existence. His own face stared back at him, blood trickling from nostrils gone translucent with quantum decay. "Took you longer this time," the other Vex wheezed, his voice layered with echoes of countless iterations. One shimmering hand gripped Vex's wrist with surprising strength. "They're watching through the fractures. Every move you make branches new traps." A shudder ran through the dying man's body as his molecules began unraveling, fingertips dissolving into iridescent mist. "Beware the 13th iteration," he gasped. "It's not a cell, it's a..." The warning disintegrated mid-syllable, his body collapsing into a swirling pool of quantum foam that evaporated before it hit the floor. The corridor lights flickered, revealing fresh graffiti scrawled in what looked like charred circuit board residue, a crude tally mark with 12 slashes, the 13th half drawn in frantic strokes. Vex's retinal display suddenly pinged Mara's stolen schematics, updating to show a previously hidden sublevel, pulsing with the same resonant frequency as the dying man's final words. The air tasted metallic, wrong, like biting down on a live wire. Somewhere ahead, the walls were learning. The monitors lining the corridor exploded to life in unison, bathing the chaos in the warden's gaunt features. His smile cut deeper than the blade currently lodged in the wall beside Vex's head. "Prisoners," Cyrus's voice oozed through every speaker, smooth as poisoned syrup. "Consider this your final examination." The screen split into dozens of cells, each one dissolving like sugar in water, restraints retracting with a hiss. Survival trial protocol initiated. Last conscious inmate receives full pardon and, his fingers steepled, a front-row seat to humanity's next evolutionary step. Metal groaned as the floor beneath Vex's boots rippled, the prison itself reshaping in real time. A scream erupted from the cell block behind him, not pain, but raw predatory glee, the sound of shackles breaking, of hunger unleashed. Mara's voice crackled in his earpiece, strained beneath the whine of overloaded systems. "He's turned the security fields into a bloodsport arena, quantum dampeners offline in every sector." Vex barely dodged as a meaty fist shattered the wall where his skull had been. The inmate, former cellmate Jorik, judging by the fractal tattoos now pulsing crimson, lurched forward with pupils blown wide from whatever stimulants the ventilation system had pumped into the air. "Dr. Pretty Boy," Jorik slurred, muscles twitching with unnatural bulk. "Gonna wear your teeth as a necklace." Panels exploded along the ceiling, raining shrapnel as the prison's AI voice purred. "Population reduction target 80%. Vex's stolen keycard flashed a warning, biosignatures spiking with adrenaline and synthetic aggression. The warden hadn't just unlocked the cells. He'd turned the entire facility into a gladiator pit with one irresistible prize. Through the smoke and screams, The monitors still showed Cyrus sipping tea in his observation throne, watching the carnage with clinical interest, but Vex noticed the tremor in the warden's fingers. The too rapid blink rate. This wasn't just a game. The quantum core's instability had forced his hand sacrifice the prisoners to buy time, thinning the herd before the whole system collapsed. A wet crunch signaled Jorik's fist connecting with something vital behind him. Vex didn't wait to see the aftermath. He plunged into the fray, keycard humming against his palm. Every inmate turned predator, every corridor booby-trapped. But the warden had forgotten one thing. The deadliest creature in any maze isn't the one fighting for survival. It's the one who designed the maze. The air inside the security hub vibrated at a frequency that made Vex's teeth ache, every surface humming with the dissonant harmonies of a dozen collapsing timelines. Before him, the master stabilizer floated in a sphere of warped space, its control panel fractured into shimmering fragments, each piece displaying a different version of the same interface, each requiring a decision that changed based on which splinter of reality he reached for. His fingers passed through the controls like smoke, the feedback sizzling up his nerves with the taste of burnt copper. Then the screaming started. To his left, a Vex in a bloodied lab coat slammed his fist against a terminal that wasn't there, shouting equations that dissolved into static. To his right, another version of himself lay convulsing on the floor, fingers clawing at a gut wound that flickered in and out of existence. The hub's walls reflected endless variations, some whispering frantic warnings, others laughing as they input commands that made the stabilizer pulse with apocalyptic light. Mara's voice crackled through the chaos, distorted by cross-dimensional interference, the locks reading your neural pathways across every possible choice point. It needs consensus. A monitor flickered to life, showing her fighting to maintain a connection as her own image fractured into overlapping iterations. But if too many versions of you touch the controls at once, the stabilizer's core flared crimson as 3 Vexes simultaneously input contradictory commands. Reality buckled. The hub's ceiling peeled away into a vortex of screaming faces, all his, all making different choices. One screamed to input the shutdown codes. Another begged to trigger the overload. A third, his eyes hollow with resignation, reached for the controls with fingers already half erased from existence. Vex clenched his jaw. Consensus wasn't the answer. The prison had weaponized his own decision paralysis against him. He stepped back, letting the cacophony of possible selves wash over him. The heroes, the cowards, the versions who'd burn the world or save it, and did the one thing none of them had tried. He stopped choosing. The stabilizer's chaos stilled for a single, perfect heartbeat. In that silence, Vex reached not for the controls, but for the fractured space between them. His fingers closed around what shouldn't exist, the gap in the system's logic, the seam where all timelines intersected. The hub's alarms choked off mid-wail as every flickering version of himself turned in unison, their hands moving as one toward a command no single iteration could have conceived. The lock disengaged with a sound like shattering glass. Beyond the stabilizer, the vault doors slid open to reveal the warden's observation platform and the true scale of the horror they'd been containing. The vault door's hydraulics shrieked like a dying animal as it sealed behind them, cutting off the pursuing guards for now. Mara's fingers flew over the access panel, her reflection warping in the polished black surface. "They'll override this in 90 seconds, she muttered, inputting a string of codes that made the panel blink red, then green, then an unsettling shade of violet Vex recognized from quantum decay simulations. A muffled explosion rocked the corridor outside. Closer, her hand stopped mid-command. The console's glow caught the raw edges of a fresh wound on her forearm, a jagged, purposeful cut forming the prison's insignia. Vex's stomach turned, the mark of a traitor. They already branded you. Mara didn't flinch as she keyed in the final sequence. Had to make it convincing when I caught you. The doors above them groaned as massive bolts slid into place, temporary safety. She turned, her eyes scanning his stolen keycard. It won't last. Cyrus has Omega Sector locked behind a biometric deadlock, needs 2 senior staff to activate. Her lips twisted into something between a smile and a grimace. Lucky for you, I still have clearance. Boots pounded against reinforced glass somewhere above. Too fast, too coordinated. Mara shoved him toward a maintenance hatch just as the ceiling monitors flickered to life, broadcasting the warden's face stretched thin with fury. Dr. Kess, Cyrus purred. How disappointing. The hatch hissed open under Vex's fingers, revealing a vertigo-inducing drop into the prison's underbelly. Mara didn't look back as she input another code, her voice low. Omega isn't just another cell block. They've wired the prisoners into a quantum lattice harvesting subconscious activity to stabilize the dimensional bomb. Her hands trembled. Every mind in there is a living algorithm, calculating detonation trajectories. The first stun rounds hit the door. Mara spun toward the noise, her profile haloed in emergency lights. Go, she snapped, tossing him a data chip that burned cold against his palm. Coordinates for the core are on that. You've got maybe 12 minutes before. The door burst inward. Armored figures swarmed her, gauntleted hands wrenching her arms behind her back. She didn't struggle, didn't scream, just locked eyes with Vex as they dragged her away, her voice cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. The real weapon was never the bomb. It's the prisoners. They're not powering it, they are it. Then she was gone, the hatch sealing with a finality that shook the walls. Vex's retinal display flickered to life, Mara's stolen schematics unfolding like a nightmare. Row upon row of glass coffins, each containing a prisoner frozen in agony, their skulls jacked into a pulsating web of quantum conduits. The countdown glowed crimson in the corner of his vision. 11 minutes, the drop into Omega's belly was endless, and the dark welcomed him. The ventilation shaft exhaled a breath of stale, metallic air as Vex squeezed through its final bend straight into the heart of his nightmares. The hidden lab sprawled before him like a cathedral to madness, its curved walls lined with 13 identical observation pods. In each one stood the warden, same cruel smirk, same immaculate uniform, but their eyes. Those told the truth, some burned with fanatic zeal, others flickered with barely restrained terror, none agreed. Timeline 9 preserves maximum infrastructure. Snap the warden in Pod 4, jabbing a holographic schematic where the prison stood gleaming amid planetary ruins. 7 offers optimal subject retention, countered Pod 11's warden, his display flashing footage of glass coffins refilling endlessly with fresh prisoners. Their voices layered over each other in rising cacophony, each arguing for a different apocalypse. Vex's stolen keycard vibrated violently in his pocket, not a warning, a resonance. The air itself thrummed with the dissonance of 13 conflicting quantum signatures, their interference peeling back the lab's facade. The floor beneath him wasn't metal at all, but a translucent membrane stretched over a void where countless ghostly hands pressed upward, their mouths moving in silent screams. This wasn't just a debate chamber, it was a voting booth for genocide. Pod 8's warden suddenly whirled, his gaze locking onto the empty air where Vex crouched. He's here. Every version of Cyrus ceased arguing at once, their heads tilting in unison like a pack of wolves catching scent. The original iteration always checks the ventilation. A console across the room erupted in warnings as the warden's holosystems rerouted power not to security, but to the membrane under Vex's boots. It shimmered, liquefying around his ankles as the hands below redoubled their clawing. The 13th pod, previously dark, flickered to life, revealing a warden strapped into restraint gear, his face a mask of fresh surgical scars. "They're not choosing timelines," the prisoner warden rasped. "They're erasing them." Overhead, the ventilation grate Vex had crawled through melted into quantum foam, its molecules rewriting themselves into a fresh set of bars. The true horror of the 13th iteration wasn't that it trapped you, it made sure you remembered every escape attempt that failed. Vex's boots slid across the suddenly frictionless floor as the chamber's walls dissolved into 1,000 shimmering panes, each reflecting not just his face, but every possible version of himself mid-stride, mid-breath, mid-scream. Some mirrors showed him sprinting toward exits that flickered in and out of existence. Others revealed his corpse slumped against control panels with varying degrees of destruction. One reflection stood perfectly still, eyes locked onto his with unnatural focus. Then it smiled, glass shattered as the figure stepped through, its movements jagged like a corrupted hologram. "Took you long enough," the other Vex said, voice layered with echoes. His stolen lab coat bore fresh bloodstains in patterns that matched the prison's fractal containment seals. "He's been farming us, harvesting the escape attempts that almost worked." Before Vex could react, the reflection's hand snapped forward, not to strike, but to press against his chest. A searing cold ripped through his ribs as their molecules briefly synchronized. Flashes of other lives flooded his vision, a Vex who'd made it to the core only to dissolve into the machinery, another dragged back screaming by guards who wore the warden's face beneath their helmets. Worst of all, the ones who'd won, only to watch the prison reconstitute itself around them like a self-healing wound. The reflection's grip tightened as its form stabilized, stealing warmth from Vex's skin with every second of contact. "You're not the original either," it whispered, "just the latest model he's stress testing." Across the chamber, more mirrors began cracking as additional reflections pressed against the glass, their palms leaving smears of quantum foam where they pushed. A klaxon wailed as the primary lights cut out, replaced by the pulsing crimson glow of the warden's emergency broadcast. The screen showed 13 identical Syrians standing in a circle, their hands linked through a shared neural interface. "Prisoner Zero has entered the proving grounds," they chorused, their grins widening in perfect unison. "Initiate fractal containment protocol." The first reflection fully emerged with a sound like tearing fabric, its features resolving into something far older than Vex's eyes, hollow with the weight of countless failed escapes. It lunged without warning, fingers elongating into blade-like shards of crystallized time. Vex barely twisted away as the thing's arm grazed his shoulder, severing not flesh but memory. The smell of his mother's lab coat, the sound of Mara's laughter, stolen in an instant by claws that fed on possibility itself. The mirrors weren't a warning. They were a battlefield, and the warden had been stockpiling soldiers. The escape pod's hatch hissed shut behind Vex with a sound like a dying breath, sealing him inside a cockpit barely larger than his old containment cell. The walls pulsed with intermittent blue light, revealing deep claw marks gouged into the control panels not by tools, but by human fingers driven to insanity. A synthesized voice crackled from the ceiling speakers, its calm inflection at odds with the words, "Warning, temporal displacement drive unstable. Launch sequence will shear 4.2 adjacent realities from continuity." Outside the reinforced viewport, the prison convulsed in its death throes. Entire corridors folded inward like paper in a furnace, security drones spiraling out of control as their programming unraveled. One slammed against the pod's hull, its single red eye flickering between threat assessment and desperate plea before exploding into shrapnel. The pod's AI continued, oblivious. Estimated collateral sentient casualties, 214,000 lives across affected timelines. Acknowledge, Vex's hand hovered over the launch console, fingers trembling not from fear, but from the sickening familiarity of the calculations scrolling across the display. These weren't just numbers, they were his own equations, repurposed from research meant to heal dimensional rifts, now weaponized into a doomsday failsafe. The warden hadn't just trapped him in the prison, he'd wired the man's conscience into the very machinery of escape. Alarms howled as the floor beneath the pod collapsed into a swirling vortex of quantum static. Through the chaos, the monitors flickered with live feeds from those four doomed realities' families eating breakfast in a Tokyo that no longer existed, children boarding a Mars-bound shuttle that would never reach orbit, an elderly version of Mara Kess adjusting her glasses as she worked on equations that would burn to ash mid-calculation. Structural collapse imminent, the AI announced, its voice fragmenting as the pod systems destabilized. Decision window, 8 seconds, the console before Vex split open, revealing not circuitry, but a pulsing quantum core, his stolen research made manifest. Touching it would complete the circuit, triggering the launch, the cost, those flickering lives erased like chalk from a blackboard, the alternative. Letting the prison take him with it when it fell into the void between dimensions. Somewhere in the screaming metal, Vex heard laughter, the warden's voice, or maybe his own. 6 seconds, his reflection in the viewport showed a face he barely recognized, eyes hollow from too many iterations of this same impossible choice. The escape pod wasn't salvation. It was the final exam, 4 seconds, then his fingers moved not toward the core, but to the fractured display, inputting a sequence that made the AI stutter. Command unrecognized, it protested as the numbers on the screen inverted, the casualty counter rewriting itself in real time. 214,000 became 0. Then -1, 1 second, the pod didn't launch, it unfolded, its metal skin peeling back to reveal a latticework of quantum threads singing with potential. Vex stepped through the viewport as it dissolved, not into the void, but into the razor-thin gap between choice and consequence. The warden had built his trap around one unshakable assumption, that given the chance to run, any prisoner would take it. The explosion when the prison collapsed lit up 5 realities at once, none of them burned. The pod's console flared white-hot under Vex's fingers as he rerouted power streams never meant to intersect. Behind him, the escape hatch dematerialized molecule by molecule, its disintegration humming with the same frequency as the warden's voice screaming through every active screen. That core stabilizes 12 active dimensions, Cyrus's image fractured across monitors, his pupils blown wide with something beyond fury, the raw terror of a gambler watching his house of cards tremble. Reality itself pulsed in time with the overload warnings, the lab's walls stretching like taffy as conflicting quantum fields collided. Vex's reflection in the buckling viewport showed 3 overlapping faces, one determined, one terrified, one already half erased by the spreading instability. He forced his focus onto the console where his stolen research flickered, equations twisting in real time as the prison's AI fought to undo his sabotage. Every correction he'd painstakingly coded now served a new purpose, not to stabilize, but to amplify the dissonance. A strangled alarm blared as the primary containment barriers failed. The air filled with a sound like glaciers calving as entire sections of the prison ceased existing in sequence, first the outer detention blocks, then the research wings, each vanishing without explosion or debris, simply winking out like burned film frames. The remaining monitors showed panicked guards running toward exits that no longer occupied physical space, their screams Doppler shifting into silence mid-stride. Cyrus reappeared on the last functioning screen, his pristine uniform now stained with sweat, fingers clawing at something unseen behind the camera. "You don't understand what you've unleashed." Spittle flew from his lips as the feed glitched, revealing flashes of other wardens in identical poses across collapsing timelines. That core wasn't just containing prisoners, it was preserving the integrity of the transmission cut off as the pod's energy shunt completed its grim work. The quantum core's final scream wasn't audible, it was a teeth-rattling vibration that traveled up the spine, a wrongness that made the eyes water as physics itself stuttered. Vex's vision doubled, then tripled, each version of the lab showing different stages of dissolution. In one, Mara stood triumphant at a secondary console, her hair whipping in an impossible wind. In another, the 13th iteration of Cyrus lunged through disintegrating glass with a surgeon's scalpel gleaming. Then came the light, not the searing blast of an explosion, but an all-consuming whiteness that didn't illuminate so much as reveal the underlying emptiness of things. Vex's last coherent thought wasn't of escape, nor revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of a mathematician who'd finally solved for zero. The monitors all went dark at once. And in that perfect silence between heartbeats, the prison forgot how to exist. The core chamber dissolved around Vex like a sandcastle in a storm, its walls warping into translucent membranes that pulsed with the jagged light of dying stars. His boots skidded across what used to be a floor, now just a brittle sheet of reality stretched over an abyss where the screams of a dozen timelines echoed. The comms unit spat static before Mara's voice clawed through, not from the present, but from some fractured moment in their past. The Mars incident wasn't an accident. Each word arrived distorted, laced with the metallic tang of a recording played too many times. It was the first test. A console materialized from the chaos, its holographic display split between two choices glowing with sickly intensity. The left screen showed the prison intact, Vex back in his glass coffin with no memory of escape, the warden's smirk sharp as a scalpel. The right flickered with grainy footage of the Mars colony's final seconds, the quantum reactor's explosion frozen mid-detonation, its shockwave curling outward like a flower in reverse. The room shuddered as the timelines battled for dominance, their conflicting laws of physics shredding the chamber at the seams. A crack split the ceiling, revealing not steel but the hollow-eyed face of another Vex, his fingers bloody from clawing at the other side of reality. "Don't trust the reset," the doppelganger screamed before the fissure sealed with a sound like bones snapping. Mara's transmission stuttered back to life, this time with a visual, her lab coat singed, gripping a microphone in some long-destroyed control room. They needed a catastrophe big enough to justify building this place. Her image glitched, revealing a brief flash of the warden standing behind her, injecting something into her neck. The core doesn't stabilize time, it harvests it. Every reset makes the system hungrier. Vex's fingers hovered over the controls as the paradox crystallized. Press left and he'd wake up imprisoned, but with a chance to undo everything except the prison would still exist, its foundations cemented by his own ignorance. Press right and he'd witness first, and what really happened on Mars but risk becoming another variable in their equation, another test subject in an endless cycle of destruction and revision. The air itself began to crystallize, freezing his breath into fractal patterns that spelled out warnings in a language of collapsing dimensions. The warden's laughter boomed from everywhere and nowhere, 13 voices harmonizing into a single taunt. "Choose fast, Doctor." The maze only gets smaller from here. Then the true horror struck. The console wasn't responding to his touch anymore, it was responding to his pulse. Every thundering heartbeat advanced the selection cursor automatically, ticking down toward a decision his body might make before his mind could. The walls pressed closer, not with the brute force of metal, but the inexorable squeeze of time itself running out. Somewhere in the storm of unraveling realities, Mara screamed his name one last time, not through the comms, but from inside his own skull, a memory that didn't belong to this timeline. A memory of her pressing a data chip into his palm in a hallway that no longer existed, her lips forming two words that shattered the illusion: third option. The console's glow turned ultraviolet as Vex's hands found the gap between choices, not left or right, but straight through the screen itself, into the bleeding edge where all paradoxes converged. The warden hadn't accounted for this. Nobody plans for the prisoner who stops fighting the maze and starts rewriting the walls. The terminal screen flickered to life under Vex's trembling fingers, its cracked display revealing security footage from a lab that no longer existed. The date stamp burned into his retinas: June 12, 2147, 23 minutes before the Mars colony vanished in a flash of violet light. The video showed his own back at the main console, adjusting the quantum dampeners, but the angle was all wrong, too low, too deliberate. Someone had hidden a camera inside the air vent. Then she stepped into frame. Dr. Lena Rask moved with the quiet precision of a surgeon, her fingers dancing across the secondary terminal while Vex was distracted. The footage glitched as she entered commands he'd never authorize, overriding fail-safes, twisting harmonic stabilizers into resonance patterns that turned containment fields into amplifiers. His stomach twisted as recognition dawned. Those weren't mistakes. Every adjustment matched the exact waveform distortions the inquiry tribunal had blamed on his negligence. A new window popped open without prompting, displaying personnel files stamped with black clearance codes. Rask's psych eval jumped out first. Subject exhibits textbook pathological loyalty to Chainlink Security Solutions. Chainlink, the private military firm that had funded the warden's first quantum detention prototypes. The pieces clattered into place with the weight of collapsing stars. The screen jumped to a different feed, this one showing Cyrus in a darkened office, sliding a dossier across his desk to a shadowed figure. Rask's voice, tinny through the recorder: "The equations will be ready for field testing within 48 hours. Cyrus's reply crawled down Vex's spine like ice water. "Make sure Dr. Vex's signature is all over the fail-safe protocols. Every martyr needs a cross." Static erupted as the prison's alarms kicked in, but not before one final image burned itself into Vex's retinas, a schematic labeled Phoenix Protocol, its central diagram a perfect match for the glass coffins now holding hundreds of prisoners. Not a containment system, a network. The math scrolled alongside it in familiar handwriting. His own. Air rushed from his lungs as the terminal exploded outward, the screen shattering into 1,000 jagged fragments that hung suspended mid-air, each shard reflecting a different moment from that doomed day on Mars. Vex reached through the storm of glass and for the first time saw the truth not as a victim but as the architect of his own destruction. The prison wasn't built to hold him. It was built because of him. The quantum tracer's pulse quickened in Vex's palm like a living thing, its erratic vibrations leading him through corridors that shouldn't exist, walls slick with condensation that glowed faintly ultraviolet under the prison's failing lights. The high-security wing breathed differently than the rest of the facility, its air thick with the ozone stink of overworked stabilizers and something darker, metallic, like old blood on copper wiring. Then he saw it. Cell 927's force field hummed at a frequency that made his teeth ache, its shimmering surface distorting the figure inside. A man in a tattered lab coat, knees drawn to his chest, rocking slightly with his forehead pressed against the glass. Dr. Emil Rourke looked up as Vex approached, his sunken eyes widening with recognition then raw terror. "No, no, you can't be here." His voice cracked through the field's distortion, hands slapping against the barrier. "They'll trigger the force field dropped without warning." Rourke spilled forward into Vex's arms, his skeletal frame trembling violently. Up close, the damage was worse, network of subcutaneous burns branching across his neck in fractal patterns, the telltale scarring of direct neural interface with unstable quantum tech. "They made me rebuild your prototypes," he gasped, fingers digging into Vex's sleeves. "Said they'd broadcast my daughter's neural patterns into the next test explosion if I refused." A wet cough doubled him over, speckling the floor with blackened blood that vaporized on contact, leaving behind acrid smoke and the undeniable signature of Chainlink's DNA triggered biocides. The kill switch wasn't in the cell, it was in Rourke's bloodstream, activated by proximity to Vex's stolen keycard. The lights above them stuttered, revealing the truth etched into the walls. Not security panels, but row upon row of identical cells stretching into infinite darkness, each containing another Emil Rourke at varying stages of disintegration. The warden hadn't just imprisoned his assistant, he'd farmed him, using quantum duplication to create a living assembly line of tortured physicists. Rourke's final breath came as a whisper against Vex's collarbone. "Check the harmonics," the 13th iteration. Then his body convulsed, skin unraveling into strands of luminous data that spiraled upward toward an air vent humming with malicious intent. The last thing to dissolve was his wedding ring, clattering to the floor with a sound like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Above them, the vent's grillwork twisted open, releasing a swarm of maintenance drones, each carrying a fresh Rourke clone in its grasp, still twitching from whatever hell they'd yanked him out of this time. The kill switch hadn't been a punishment, it was a reload. The holographic equation pulsed like a dying star above Vex's workstation, its fragmented variables snapping into alignment, one agonizing digit at a time. Sweat stung his eyes as he fed the console data streams from 3 collapsing timelines, each number torn from security logs, each variable extracted from the screams of quantum echoes reverberating through the prison's failing bones. The display shimmered with warning glyphs, their crimson edges spelling out the cost in cold, clinical terms. Application will erase all quantum anomalies within 1.2 parsecs. A shudder ran through the floor as the prison's central spire buckled, its twisted metal groaning like a living thing in pain. Through the observation window, the glass coffins flickered in and out of existence, their occupants' faces stretched in silent screams as reality itself unraveled around them. Vex's fingers hesitated over the final keystroke. This wasn't just mathematics anymore, it was euthanasia for a system grown cancerous with stolen time. Mara's stolen day, the chip spat its last coherent stream across the secondary monitor, revealing the true horror of the warden's design. The prison didn't just harvest quantum signatures, it required them to exist. Every failed escape attempt, every collapsed timeline, every tortured Rourke clone had been fuel for an engine designed to burn through dimensions. The stability equation in his hands wasn't a solution. It was a guillotine blade hovering over the neck of a self-replicating nightmare. Glass shattered behind him as a maintenance drone burst through the wall, its grasping claws extended toward the console. Vex didn't flinch, the equation was complete. All that remained was the final variable, his own quantum signature, woven through every iteration of the prison like a flawed strand of DNA. The hologram's warning flared brighter as he input the last command, its light painting the room in funeral hues. Somewhere in the bleeding gaps between seconds, he thought he heard Mara laugh, not the strained chuckle of recent years, but the bright, unguarded sound from when they'd first theorized harmonic stabilization over stolen lab coffee. The drone's claws froze millimeters from his spine as the console emitted a sound like shattering crystal. Then the numbers began to move on their own. Not collapsing, multiplying, the equation wasn't erasing anomalies, it was teaching them how to cancel each other out. The prison's walls rippled as conflicting quantum states reached across timelines, hands clasping in the dark. One by one, the glass coffins went dark not with death, but with the quiet relief of dreams ending naturally. The drone clattered to the floor, its systems scrambling to comprehend a reality where the equation had rewritten more than just the prison, it had altered the very definition of containment. Vex exhaled as the hologram's warning dissolved into a single, pulsing word, equilibrium. Outside the shattered viewport, the stars burned strangely steady. For the first time in countless iterations, they weren't blinking out, they were holding position. The warden's voice crackled through the failing intercom, thick with disbelief. What have you then? Silence, perfect and absolute, as the last unstable variable resolved itself. The console's light dimmed, the numbers settled, and in that crystalline moment between one breath and the next, Vex realized the terrible beauty of his solution. You don't destroy a recursive nightmare by breaking its chains. You give it the one thing it was never designed to handle, peace. The walls screamed first, not metaphorically. The alloy itself howled as molecular bonds stretched between realities, the sound of 1,000 prisons merging into one monstrous architecture. Ceilings inverted into floors mid-stride, guards walked through themselves as competing versions occupied the same space, and worst of all were the faces. Every inmate Vex passed wore a shifting mosaic of expressions: terror, rage, euphoria, as their consciousnesses stitched together across timelines. The air smelled of burning hair and ozone, thick with the psychic backwash of collapsing identities. Warden Cyrus stood at the heart of it all, his silhouette multiplied across 13 overlapping projections, each more distorted than the last. His voice came from everywhere at once, layered with the echoes of his own infinite cruelty. Final containment protocol initiated. The words vibrated through Vex's teeth as the prison's central spire split open, revealing not machinery, but a gaping wound in reality, a pulsing, tumorous mass of fused dimensions. 30,000 iterations of this facility, the warden's chorus, soon to be one. Screams erupted from the inmate blocks as biological mergers began. A guard's arm melted into the wall as he reached for his sidearm, his uniform stitching itself into the concrete. Two prisoners mid-fight suddenly shared a torso, their combined face locked in a silent howl as their fists kept swinging. The rules of physics were now suggestions written in disappearing ink. Mara's voice crackled through Vex's failing earpiece, barely audible over the dimensional static. He's not trying to destroy timelines, he's averaging them. The revelation clicked like a bullet in a chamber. By forcing every version of the prison to occupy the same quantum coordinates, Cyrus wasn't just consolidating power. He was creating a stable, self-perpetuating hell where escape became mathematically impossible because every possible route led back to the same fused nightmare. The floor beneath Vex liquefied without warning, swallowing him into a vertical corridor where gravity spiraled like water down a drain. He fell upward, sideways, through a gallery of frozen moments, 100 versions of himself making different choices, all converging toward the same glowing maw at the center. The warden's laughter followed him through the collapse, 13 voices whispering the same taunt. No more mirrors, Doctor. just one perfect, eternal cage. Then the light changed, the walls stopped screaming, and Vex realized with a chill deeper than the void between stars that the merging was complete. A metallic cough echoed through the ruined comms array as Marrakes dragged herself upright, blood-slicked fingers leaving smears across the shattered console. The wound in her side pulsed with each breath, its edges shimmering unnaturally, not just bleeding but unraveling at the molecular level. She caught Vex's wrist as he reached for her, her grip fever-hot. "Took you long enough," she wheezed, tapping the cracked display where a fractal wave pattern thrummed, found the prison's heartbeat. The screen flickered with a visualization too precise to be mere technology, a quantum resonance map stretching across infinite iterations of the facility, each vibrating at slightly different frequencies. Mara's free hand hovered over a jury-rigged transmitter, its wiring fused with what looked suspiciously like neural tissue. "Broadcast your equation through this," she gasped, "and it'll propagate through every dimension where the prison exists." Like striking every piano key at once, her lips twisted into something between a grin and a grimace. "But you've got one shot. Input it at the exact moment all frequencies align," or a convulsion racked her body as the wound fluoresced violet, tendrils of quantum decay spiderwebbing up her ribs. Vex's stolen keycard spat static as its display updated in real time, a countdown synchronized to the prison's death throes, 3 minutes until dimensional convergence. Mara's head lolled against the console, her breath shallow but her eyes blazing with frantic clarity. "Frequency alignment happens when the wardens merge," she whispered. "That's when the system's vulnerable. That's when The wall behind them dissolved without warning, revealing the warden's command center, or rather, 13 versions of it fused into a nightmare collage of conflicting architectures. Cyrus stood at the epicenter, his form flickering between iterations, hands plunged wrist-deep into a pulsating quantum core. Dr. Kess, his voice layered over itself like a corrupted symphony, still playing the martyr after all these resets. Mara didn't flinch, her bloody fingers found Vex's, guiding them toward the console's heart, a crude interface where her own neural ports had been physically jacked into the system. "Need a live wire," she murmured, "someone who remembers every version of the prison, every failure, every—" Her breath hitched as the wound's glow intensified. "I'm already bleeding across dimensions, might as well." The console screamed to life before she could finish, its displays overwritten by the same equilibrium equation Vex had crafted but altered. Refined, Mara's additions wove through the math like counterpoint harmonies, accounting for variables he hadn't dreamed of. The warden's laughter cut off mid-chorus as the core's light stuttered. Somewhere in the collapsing timelines, a frequency began to hum. The corridor ahead of Vex dissolved in slow motion, its walls peeling back like layers of burned film to reveal glimpses of other prisons. Some flooded, others choked with vines, all sharing the same skeletal architecture collapsing inward. His boots splashed through puddles that weren't water but liquid time, each step sending ripples through reflections of himself running in opposite directions. The antenna array's signal pulsed through his stolen keycard, its rhythm accelerating as competing countdowns on the walls ticked toward alignment. 5 minutes in the main facility, 3 in the mirrored detention block overhead, 17 seconds in the charred remains of a timeline where he'd already failed. A security drone materialized from the ceiling mist, its targeting laser painting his chest. Vex didn't slow down. The beam passed through him like he was a ghost, the drone's confusion lasting just long enough for him to wrench its power core free. The explosion sent shrapnel carving through 6 overlapping realities at once, revealing a momentary fracture in the chaos, a narrow service tunnel thrumming with the antenna's resonant frequency. He dove through as the walls stitched themselves shut behind him, the prison's structural groans now harmonizing with the countdowns in eerie precision. The tunnel wasn't spared from the unraveling. Handholds melted into the bulkhead as he climbed, gravity twisting unpredictably until up became a direction dictated by the antenna's pull rather than physics. His earpiece spat a garbled warning from Mara, the only clear word being phase lock, the exact millisecond when all collapsing dimensions would share identical quantum coordinates. The walls confirmed it. Every timer now displayed identical digits, 2 minutes. Vex's lungs burned as he burst onto the antenna gantry, the structure shuddering underfoot like a living thing in its death throes. The array itself was a nightmare of fused realities, 3 separate transmission dishes occupying the same space, their edges blurred by quantum static. He didn't need to choose which one to use. At phase lock, they'd all become the same instrument. A shadow moved in the distortion. The warden stepped through the antenna's field, his body flickering between 13 iterations, some missing limbs, others bleeding equations instead of blood, yet all wearing the same triumphant sneer. "You can't broadcast silence, Doctor." The voices chorused as the countdown hit 60 seconds. The prison's final scream built in the walls around them, a sound beyond noise, the howl of a system eating its own tail. Vex's fingers found the console, its surface now so hot it seared his prints away. The equilibrium equation glowed in his mind, perfected by Mara's dying refinements. He input the first sequence just as the warden lunged, 13 sets of hands grasping for his throat. The antenna array came alive not with a hum, but with a resonance so pure it made the collapsing timelines pause. For one impossible second, every version of the prison stood still, then the singing began. The antenna console burned beneath Vex's fingertips, its surface flickering between solid metal and quantum foam as the paradox took hold. Every keystroke echoed across collapsing timelines here, a version of himself slumped against the panel, whispering warnings through bloodied lips. There, another Vex screamed to hurry, his form unraveling mid-gesture. The transmission sequence pulsed on-screen, its completion bar crawling forward while a secondary counter ticked backward in jagged red numerals, his personal countdown to erasure. "You're not solving the equation," hissed the Vex to his left, his lab coat stitched with chain-link insignias. "You're becoming part of it." His fingers passed through the console like smoke, the effort to intervene costing him cohesion. Across the gantry, a younger iteration lunged forward, his eyes wild with revelation. "They designed this moment. The warden wants you to hesitate." This version's hands were pristine, unmarked by prison scars, a Vex from before the glass coffin, before the betrayals. His certainty fractured as quantum decay began chewing at his edges. The console's displays warped, showing 3 conflicting outcomes superimposed, one where the transmission failed, leaving the prison eternally recursing, another where it succeeded, scrubbing Vex from history like a corrected error, and a third, fainter possibility where the signal branched uncontrollably, birthing new anomalies faster than it could erase them. A hand clamped onto Vex's shoulder, solid, real. He turned to face his own hollow-eyed double, this one missing 2 fingers and smiling like a man who'd already burned his bridges. Know why they never found a stable solution? The grip tightened. Some equations only balance when the mathematician becomes a variable. The antenna array shrieked as phase lock hit, the dish's metal petals twisting into a perfect fractal. One truth crystallized in the chaos. Every version arguing was right. Stopping meant eternal recursion. Proceeding meant self-annihilation. But the third path, the one the warden never anticipated required embracing the paradox instead of solving it. Vex's fingers moved not to abort or confirm, but to redefine, inputting a sequence that made the console scream. The transmission wouldn't erase anomalies. It would redeem them, weaving every flawed iteration back into the equation as necessary corrections rather than errors. The first to dissolve wasn't Vex, but the chain-link version, his smirk melting into dawning respect as his atoms unknitted. The younger iteration followed, mouth open in protest that became a sigh of understanding. Only the maimed double remained, his smile softening as the quantum winds tugged at his fraying edges. "Took you long enough," he murmured and let go. Light erupted from the antenna, not in a beam, but a resonance, a chord so perfect it made the collapsing timelines shiver in recognition. The prison's walls didn't crumble, they harmonized, their conflicting frequencies snapping into alignment like iron filings to a magnet. Somewhere in the stillness, a single counter ticked over to 0. Not an end, a resolution. The console's surface burned cold under Vex's fingers as the final equation locked into place, its symbols writhing like live wires before snapping into perfect alignment. Reality itself held its breath, the prison's groaning walls frozen mid-collapse, shards of debris suspended in eerie stillness, even the warden's scream trapped in the act of tearing from his throat. Then the transmission began, not with a roar, but with a whisper, a single pure tone resonating through every fractured timeline at once. Cyrus's form shuddered, his outstretched arms branching into infinite iterations before snapping back into one monstrous silhouette. "You can't rewrite reality." His voice came layered with echoes of every version of himself, from the crisp, uniformed bureaucrat to the hollow-cheeked prisoner strapped to an interrogation chair. The words curdled as they hit the air, syllables unraveling into static as the antenna's signal threaded through them. Vex watched the numbers scroll across the display, not counting down this time, but reconciling. The prison's collapsing structure pulsed in time with the transmission, its rusted corridors and flickering force fields dissolving into their purest energetic forms. Ceilings became auroras, guard towers stretched into luminous fractals. Even the glass coffins housing the prisoners transformed, their occupants' faces softening from agony to wonder as the equations remade them from the inside out. The warden lunged through the metamorphosis, his fingers elongating into jagged shards of corrupted data. "You don't understand what you've done." Spittle flew from his lips, each droplet containing miniature reflections of the prison's worst atrocities. "This place exists because the world needs monsters to fear." His body convulsed as the signal reached critical harmony, patches of his uniform melting away to reveal the truth beneath not flesh, but a latticework of stolen memories and forced confessions, the raw material of institutionalized terror. Vex didn't flinch. The console's light bathed his face as he input one final command not to destroy, but to transfigure. The antenna's hum shifted octaves, its resonance now weaving through the prison's energy patterns like a surgeon's suture. Wherever the tone touched, fractures healed differently, barbed wire became bridge lines, surveillance drones sprouted wings, the warden's screech of rage morphed midair into a falcon's cry as his form dissolved not into nothingness, but into the wind itself, a force of nature stripped of malice. High above, the last vestige of the quantum core detonated in silence, its explosion birthing not fire, but a constellation of possibilities. Vex closed his eyes as the light hit him, no longer fearing erasure. The equation hadn't just balanced the prison's chaos, it had rewritten the rules of the game entirely, and for the first time in uncountable iterations, the numbers sang instead of screamed. White light, That was the first thing Vex registered: white light stinging his eyes through half-closed lids, carrying the sterile scent of antiseptic and something almost forgotten. Earth, the hum of medical monitors crowded out the phantom echoes of collapsing quantum fields. He tried to sit up, muscles screaming in protest, before a nurse in blue scrubs gently pushed him back. "Easy there, Dr. Vex. You've been in and out for 3 days." The wall screen flickered to life on its own, broadcasting a news segment about the Mars colony's latest harvest: vivid green growth domes stretching under pink skies. No explosion, no inquiry tribunals. The ticker at the bottom scrolled through mundane headlines: solar flare warnings, a breakthrough in fusion efficiency, nothing about a prison forged between dimensions. His lab assistant, Emil Rourke, burst through the door balancing 2 steaming coffees, his face unlined by torture, fingers intact. "You scared the hell out of us, Elias." He shoved a cup into Vex's shaking hands, oblivious to how the doctor stared at his wedding ring, the same one that had clattered to the floor of a cell that no longer existed. "Next time you pull an all-nighter in the lab, maybe don't faceplant into the quantum core's coolant array." Vex's voice came out sandpaper rough. "Kess." "Where's Mara Kess?" Rourke blinked. "Who?" The heart monitor spiked as Vex grabbed the tablet from his bedside, fingers flying through personnel files. No record of her, not in research logs, not in the Mars colony archives, as if she'd been scrubbed from history, or never woven into it at all. Yet when he closed his eyes, he could still smell the burnt wire tang of her dying neural interface, hear her voice whispering through static. The window shade snapped up suddenly, revealing a sky streaked with contrails. Far above them, something glinted: a satellite, perhaps, or maybe just a trick of the light. But the way it pulsed in time with Vex's racing heartbeat felt deliberate, like a signal, like a handprint pressed against the fabric of a world that remembered nothing. Rourke was saying something about discharge paperwork. Vex wasn't listening. The coffee cup in his hand trembled, its surface rippling not from his unsteady grip, but from a vibration too precise to be random. A frequency, a harmonic, somewhere in the spaces between what was and what might have been, an equation was still balancing, and Mara Kess had always been brilliant at leaving trails. The tablet buzzed against the sheets, its screen flickering to life without being touched. Vex grabbed it just as the words materialized, not typed, but unfolding from the depths of the display like ink bleeding through wet paper. The equation created a new timeline branch. His throat tightened at the next line. "They're still out there, and now they know it's possible." The warning dissolved into a string of numbers, coordinates, pulsing faintly red as though the device itself feared transmitting them. Across the room, the window shade rattled against its frame, though no wind blew. Vex's reflection in the glass didn't move when he did. It stayed frozen, lips parted mid-sentence, eyes locked on something behind him. He spun, expecting an intruder, but the hospital room stood empty. When he turned back, his reflection was gone. In its place, the glass showed a different scene entirely. A facility carved into a mountainside, its blackened metal doors stenciled with a half-erased chain-link insignia. The image lasted only a second before shattering into static, but the afterimage burned. Those were the coordinates. Rourke's voice echoed from the corridor, cheerful and oblivious. Vex's fingers trembled as he wiped the tablet's history. The warning didn't come from Mara. The syntax was all wrong. Too clipped, too clinical. This was a message from something that had learned to mimic human communication, but missed the heartbeat beneath the words. The heart monitor's steady beep stuttered, just once, just long enough to notice. Vex pressed his palm to the window. Cold seeped through his skin, deeper than glass should allow. Somewhere beyond the view, in a facility that wasn't supposed to exist, a door hissed open, not on its own, because something had walked through it. The coordinates burned in Vex's vision long after the tablet screen went dark. He blinked, and for a fraction of a second, his reflection in the hospital window wasn't wearing scrubs. It was clad in the faded orange jumpsuit of Quantum Holding Facility 927, its collar still smudged with the chalky residue of containment foam. Then it was gone. The ordinary world rushed back, the beep of monitors, the squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway, but the air tasted different now, charged. Like the moment before a storm, his fingers closed around the crumpled research notes stuffed under his pillow, pages full of equations the doctors had dismissed as delirium. The ink shimmered faintly, reacting to something unseen. Beyond the window, a distant hum vibrated through the glass, not a machine, not a vehicle, but a sound he knew in his bones. The harmonic signature of a portal struggling to stabilize. Rourke's laughter echoed from the corridor, mingling with the rattle of a meal cart. Vex's hands moved on their own, folding the notes into precise thirds, tucking them into his sleeve with the ease of a man who'd hidden contraband for years. The blanket pooled around his waist as he swung his legs over the bed, soles hitting linoleum that pulsed imperceptibly, out of sync with his heartbeat. "Hey, what are you?" A nurse froze in the doorway, clipboard slipping from her grip as she took in the determination on his face. Vex didn't answer. His reflection in the window mouthed 3 silent words just as the glass rippled like water struck by a stone. "It's not over." Somewhere beyond the city, beyond the carefully reconstructed timeline, something answered. The hum deepened into a groan, the sound of reality bending under the weight of unsolved equations. The portal wasn't just activating, it was hunting. And the notes in Vex's sleeve weren't just paper anymore, they were a beacon.